Okay, good morning everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Suzanne Beynon and I'm the Publisher Relations Manager at PLS. During today's session, I'll be providing a general introduction to collective licensing in the UK. But before we get started, there are a couple of housekeeping rules to go through. The audio for this session is available through your computer speakers or by calling in by phone. If you are experiencing poor sound quality using your computer speakers, you may wish to dial in now. In your control panel, under audio, select telephone and dial the number shown and use the access code and audio pin shown when instructed. Please do ask questions throughout the session. You are muted, however, on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see the control panel, which includes a questions box. Please write any questions or comments you have throughout the session, and I'll aim to answer all of these at the end, as my colleague Evie Ioannidou will be monitoring the questions box. For other technical issues, please use this box to let us know. We may not be able to help with all technical issues, but we'll help where we can. So as I said, today we'll be covering an introduction to collective licensing, and I'll just share my screen with you now. So the first question that I get asked by many publishers is, what exactly is collective licensing? And I aim to answer this today by giving you a little bit more information about the Publishers Licensing Society and how collective licensing works and where we fit in and where you fit in. The second question that I get asked is, how can you ensure that you're getting the most out of collective licensing and optimizing the potential revenue you can get through it? And I'll cover this. So the second session of the webinar will look at how you can get the most from your account with us. And finally, I'll briefly mention some of our other services that offer additional revenue opportunities. But before we get started, to start with, bear with me 2 seconds. So to start with, I'd like to outline the purpose of the Publishers Licensing Society. PLS helps publishers who have invested their time and money in creating original content. Our purpose is to help you manage, monitor, and monetize your titles. So put simply, we're here to ensure any secondary copying of your work. And by secondary copying, I mean for uses like scanning and copying chapters from books for use within course packs in universities, or perhaps sharing articles that are purchased through media monitoring organizations around corporations. So we make sure that this secondary copying is properly licensed and that you receive revenue for such use. And there are a few key points to remember about the PLS. We're owned by you, the UK publishing industry. We have the Publishers Association, the Professional Publishers Association, the Association of Learned Professional and Society Publishers, and also the Independent Publishers Guild, which each sit on our board. And this means that we represent book, magazine, and journal publishers with over 3,000 publishers currently signed up to us. And we're proudly a not-for-profit organisation, deducting 6% from monies distributed to publishers to cover administration fees. But before we go into more detail, it's worth looking back in time to see how we got here and remind ourselves why collective licensing is really important to publishers. And it all really began in the 1970s when collective licensing became necessary because of the invention and widespread use of the photocopier. Before the 1970s, there hadn't really been an easy means of copying printed material, but it was at this point that it all changed, and both publishers and authors alike felt that they needed to regain control over the copying of their work. Now, at the time, the Whitford Committee were looking at copyright reform in the UK, and they decided that a voluntary solution was needed. So licensing by the industry within the existing legal framework rather than by means of statutory licensing. Now, this led to a formation of a number of bodies which some of you may be aware of. In 1977, the Authors Licensing and Collecting Society, or ALCS, was set up to handle public lending right money for authors, and they wanted to handle collective licensing on their behalf. This meant that the publishers set up their own equivalent body in 1981 to handle collective licensing on behalf of publishers. and that was where the Publishers Licensing Society really began. And together, ALCS and PLS set up the Copyright Licensing Agency to do their licensing on behalf of both in respect of books, magazines, and journals. And the newspaper set up their own equivalent body in 1996 called the Newspaper Licensing Agency, which is now known as NLA Media Access since they started beginning licensing for some magazines in 2013. But while photocopying started it all, it's important to note that collective licensing increasingly works with scanning and copying from digital originals. And this is really because digital has changed everything again. The spark of the internet and the explosion of digital media has simply created even more risk, demand, and potential revenue for creators and rights owners in the digital world. And collective licensing continues to adapt to reflect the changing copying habits of the users. And we felt that this quote by Adam Singer of the Authors Licensing Collecting Society really sums up the importance of copyright in the digital age. So why was collective licensing seen as the appropriate solution? Well, there are a number of reasons that I'll show here, there are a number of reasons which I'll highlight, but they all arise because of the simplicity of the blanket license that the CLA sells. And the blanket license really means that licensees are charged a flat fee that enables them to copy small extracts of legally purchased publications for internal use. And now what this means is for universities and businesses, it means that when they want to make multiple copies, rights holders are remunerated for copying of works where it's not practical to license directly, and it provides a one-stop shop for these users that want to make multiple permissions to copy publications. It also ensures an orderly marketplace and strengthens copyright awareness. And licensing solutions importantly remove the reason for government to get involved and make statutory exceptions to copyright. And so that's what we're about, but it's worth looking at how the system works, and you can really see why through the collective licensing map in the UK, why it's kept so simple for users, for the rights holders even. So you can see here that in the UK collective license system, we cover publishers, authors, and design artists, and there's a respective collecting body in place that covers each. And these sit in between the rights holders and the licensing agent, either NLA Media Access or CLA. With CLA licensing book, magazine, and journal publishers, and NLA Media Access licensing some magazines, as I've mentioned. The CLA sell the licenses to the community, and the CLA also have agreements with their equivalent organizations overseas known as reproductive rights organizations. So some of you may have heard of CCC in America or the Copyright Agency in Australia. Now, when these licensing agents collect money from the licensees and also from overseas licensing in the case of CLA, this is passed back through to the rights holders, and it's split three ways between the publishers, the authors, and the design artists, and the representative collective body will pay it back to their rights holders. This consequently means that when we pay any money to you, it is purely your share of the money. It is the publisher's share of the money, and you are not responsible for paying on any share of this to authors or freelancers. Now, for most of you, your licensing will be done through the Copyright Licensing Agency, and so this section will focus on the day-to-day work of CLA to give you a better idea of how the revenue that we pay to you is generated. The purpose of the CLA, as we've seen from that map, is to sell licenses to companies. And they cover business, education, and the public sectors. And as I've mentioned, this licenses that they sell are blanket licenses. But equally, as much as we need to sell the licenses, we also need to know where the money that is made up by that license fee should be where that money should go. And so a big part of the day-to-day work of CLA is data collection. They have a huge team of field officers that look at what has been copied within a sample of their licensees year on year, and the data that they collect informs us where to allocate the money that licensees have paid. And that's what informs the allocations to your titles. And CLA are also equally then involved in promoting respect for copyright amongst their licensees and indeed around the world. They work very hard to ensure that their licensees are copyright compliant and that they know what the extents of their license with the CLA are. And you can see here the extent of the reach of the CLA. They have 100% penetration in the HE market, with every university in the UK being licensed, and every state school is licensed through a deal that they have with the Department of Education, and equally 6,500 businesses are licensed. And they also, as we've seen, have a global reach with their equivalent organisations overseas, with those RROs that I mentioned before. And a key measure of their success is really the amount of revenue that they've generated year on year. And this converted to £33.8 million that PLS distributed to publishers in 2014-15. So this brings me to the second section of the webinar, which is really to outline how you can get the most from your PLSE account to make sure that you're getting your fair share of collective licensing revenue. And there are three key areas where the PLS helps publishers get the most out of secondary licensing. So we license your publications for copying. We maintain an up-to-date list of all of your titles under license. And we distribute revenue to you, and we ensure that accurate reports are made available to you. And all of these reports will be accessed through your account. But there are a few key areas where publishers can ensure that they are getting the most out of the account, and these are the key account actions that I would like to cover now. The first, as you can see here, the 5 key account actions are to maintain a comprehensive and up-to-date list of your titles on your account, to ensure that you're fully included in as many licenses as possible, that you're kept up to date with new licenses, that you review your license revenue breakdown, and that you keep your company and user details up to date. Now, the first key account action that I'd like to draw your attention to is that maintaining an up-to-date list of your titles. I cannot stress the importance of this, as this is what will ensure that your titles that any money allocated to your titles get paid straight to you. And please remember that any out-of-print titles that you may have published in the past can still be included on your account as long as you've never sold on the rights. And often out-of-print titles are more likely to be copied, especially in educational establishments, as they're not as readily available. And the second key account action, which is equally as important, is to ensure that your titles are fully included in as many licenses as possible, and that you review and set your own prices for transactional licensing, such as the document delivery license or the second extract license. Now, all the licenses that you can opt into are on the licensing settings of your PLSE account. I won't go through the PLSE account now, but we do have a previous webinar video on the website that goes through step by step all of the areas where you can find these and make sure that your settings are all up to date. The reason that it's important to be included in the licenses is because this is what's going to increase your visibility with the end users, such as universities when they use the check permissions tool on the CLA website. Equally, if you're not included in any of the licenses, it doesn't mean that users aren't going to copy your work, but what it will mean is that you won't have a share in any of the revenue. And the third section that I'd like key account action that I'd like to finish on really is to keep up to date with new licenses. And this ties in with keeping your company and user details up to date. We will often we would normally contact the primary contact when new licenses are made available through the PLSE licensing settings page. But as you can see here, we also have a number of services in addition to PLSE, one of which is our permissions clearance service, PLS Clear. PLS Clear is a service designed to make publishers' permissions business more profitable by generating more revenue from permissions, but also saving costs. And it does this by streamlining the process of getting permission requests to the rights holders. Now, we will be holding a webinar on this service in the near future, but in the meantime, please do contact us if you would like to find out more. And so this really brings me to the end of an introduction to collective licensing. But I would like at this point to take the opportunity to answer any questions that you might have. And if you haven't asked any throughout, please do put them in the box now and I'll try and get to them. Okay, so one of the questions is, what are the CLA equivalents in North America and Canada? Well, that's CCC in North America and RRO called Access in Canada. And I'll send out the details. We'll be sending out a follow-up after this, so I can send around a list of the different RROs if anybody would like them. And I will be sending out a copy of the slides, and it is a lot of information to cover. So yes, all of these will be made available and a recording will be sent out afterwards. So one of the questions is about copyright for digital resources and other than what's covered by the license. So that with collective licensing, it just covers obviously the internal copying for internal use. It might be worth, I'll get in touch with you, Susan, to look at the other copyright issues that you've addressed that PLS Clear might be able to look at. Okay, so there's an interesting question here which I'd like to cover, and that is, can you list two title names? So if you've got a publication where you've got maybe perhaps an older title name and you've changed the title. Now, all of the allocations that we make to titles are actually by ISSN numbers or ISBN numbers, and we'll use this as the unique identifier. So really the most important aspect of uploading titles onto your account is to ensure that the ISBN number or the ISSN number is correct, as that's what we're going to look at when we identify the title. And so the final question here is, how do you pay commission back to photographers and contributors if the title is licensed with you by the publisher? Well, that's done through the ALCS and the some equivalent representative organisations for photographers, such as the Design and Artist Copyright Society, BAPLA, who represent photographers, and also the Artist Collecting Society, ACS. And now all of these bodies are put in place to ensure that money gets paid back to the publishers, and the Authors Licensing Collecting Society work hard to track down authors. But I would encourage you to ask your authors and design artists to sign up with their equivalent body to ensure that they get a share of the money. In terms of what the license allows, one person has asked about the extent limits, and what the CLA licenses currently allow is up to 5% or one chapter from a book or one article from a magazine, whichever is greater, to be copied. There's no backdated time limit on publications. One person has asked, is there any backdated time limit on publications, as, whether they go back 30 years? As long as you've never sold on the rights to the titles, it doesn't matter how old they are. If they have an ISBN number, an ISSN number, or an ISSN number, they should be included on your account. And currently, the only types of publications that are included are books, websites, magazines and journals, anything that has a URL, top-level URL, an ISSN number or an ISBN number. So at the moment, blogs aren't included, but that's something that we are looking at. Okay, and what we'll do following this session is include a list of all of the questions that have been asked and the answers that I've run through to make sure that everything's been covered. If there are any further questions, I'd urge you to ask them now. Okay, and what I'll also do is following the session is we will send out a feedback form. Please do fill out the form, and if you would like us to schedule a follow-up call or meeting with you to run through your account on an individual basis, please do indicate on this form. There will be some room at the end of the form for you to do that, and we can get the ball rolling. Okay, thank you all for attending, and please do get in touch if you have any further queries.